mental toughness.
Listen, stop feeling sorry for yourself. Come on, man. What's wrong with you?
The mental toughness mindset.
I had to go to grow.
Martin Luther King.
You got challenges that you're going to run across. Okay, welcome everyone to another edition of is it edition? Redition? Another show. Welcome to another show of Elite Psyche. This is a program that talks more about mental toughness, mindset, your psyche, having an elite psyche. Most people who become successful in life have to go through a lot of challenges, and a lot of challenges. When you have a lot of challenges, you need a lot of mental toughness. And so the guys that I try and the ladies I try to interview here are those who have had success in life, and I know that they've gone through some things to come out on the other side. So those are the ones that we do our best to have on this show. Today we got a special guest, another special guest, and I want to talk a little bit about him right quick. Name is Bill Lester. Well, William Alexander Lester, but better known as Bill Lester. And Bill is a retired professional race car driver. He last competed part-time in the NASCAR Camping World Truck Series, driving the number 17 Ford F-150 for David Gilliard Racing. Lester previously completed full-time in the Truck Series from 2002 to midway through 2007. Lester was the NASCAR's only full-time African-American driver during that time. After that, he moved to sports car racing, competing in the Rolex Sports Car Series from 2007 to 2012. Lester has competed part-time in the same series from 1998 to 2001. And I mean, this is a special event for me because I met Lester at one of our speaking classes and just followed up with him and wanted to say, man, look, can we talk? Can we interview? Can we just find out more about you? And he agreed with me. So without further ado, I want to bring on Mr. Bill Lester here. Are you there, sir?
I'm here, Tony. Good to see you, man.
All right, good to see you, man. And I really appreciate this because this is special, man. The more I look into your information and everything that you've done, man, I think a lot of people are going to love this interview. I mean, I think so because, I mean, you are a person who has, you're an innovator, you are a creator, you're a person that stepped out, and I know we're going to talk about a lot of that because some of the things that you had to do to be out front and the things that you had to go through to get there. But let's just jump right into this now and talk a little bit about your background. I know that you were wait a minute, make sure I got this right. I don't have it right. Okay, tell me about your collegiate career, because I didn't know. Usually you think that a person that's a race car driver would just be racing all his life, but you kind of did it a little bit. I'm not gonna say backwards, but in reverse, because I think your book says something like being in reverse. I don't know, but so you went through college and got all kind of degrees. Then you decide to follow your dream and become a race car driver. So let's tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, you did basically encapsulate why I titled my book Winning in Reverse, for the reasons that you mentioned, and we can get into that more. But As far as my collegiate degree, I have an electrical engineering and computer science degree from the University of California, Berkeley, which was at the time that I was going through there, the second highest rated engineering school in the country, second only to MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which I applied to and was glad that I didn't get there because I'm really not a huge fan of the Boston, New England area. So I'm a Northern California guy, got accepted to, the school that was really around the corner from me because I was living in Oakland before going to college. Went to Skyline High, I'm a graduate there. But really, it was a means to an end. I did not have the passion to be an engineer or a computer scientist. It was a tool that I used so that I could really live my dream of becoming a professional race car driver. If you want me to, I'll back up.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to indicate is that when I was a very young kid, single digit years, my parents told me I didn't go anywhere without a Hot Wheels or a Matchbox car in my hand. And I was the type of kid that wasn't all that excited about street cars. I loved race cars. It was even the case that when my father, who is a huge sports car fan, and subscribed to Road and Track and Car and Driver magazine, when he got his issues coming home to the house, I beat him to his issues. I beat him to his magazines because I wasn't interested in the street cars that they were reviewing. I wanted to flip back to the back of the magazine to see the racing results. I was reading the stories about the races. I was looking at the race cars. That's what really, just intrigued me and captured me. And so, my father knew I had this basic love affair of race cars, but he knew nothing about racing, about, auto racing. But he was talking to a friend of his and, he said, listen, my son loves race cars. Do you know anything about this? And he said, yeah, why don't you bring him out to a race? I'll host you guys and he can experience it and see if it's something that's cool for him. And so, yeah, just short of being 8 years old, my father and his friend, who is a colleague of his at IBM in San Jose, we trekked up to Monterey, California at a track called Laguna Seca. And we watched these cars called Can-Am cars zipping by at 160, 170 miles an hour. Man, that set the hook for me. I was done. After that, I knew I wanted to be a race car driver. I mean, it was just as cool as I had thought it was when I saw it in the magazines, when I watched it on TV, seeing it there in person and experiencing, the sounds, the sights, just the whole aura of it. The environment was just intoxicating for me. But there's a harsh reality. My folks didn't know anything about the world of motorsports, right? I wasn't born into the sport. I'm not second, third generation like a lot of these drivers that are out there now are. My father actually was a very, very proficient basketball player. So, I did all the stick and ball stuff, that most kids do in the neighborhood, right? Because that was easily accessible and that's what your friends did, right? So you went out there and did that. I was in the inner city. I didn't have friends that had go-karts or race cars or anything like that. But I knew there was something that I thought was really cool, and that's all I thought about. So fast forward a little bit, I got my driver's license, when I was 16, I couldn't wait to get it. And it was game on for me. It was the Fast and the Furious before it was a movie. I was doing all sorts of crazy things in my parents' street cars and, in the regular, family cars and stuff like that. And then I bought my first street car of my own. And by that time, we had moved from San Jose, California to Oakland, California, because my father moved from his position at IBM to a professor of chemistry at UC Berkeley, at Cal Berkeley. So we lived in the Oakland Hills. And so I bought this little Mazda RX-3, this little rotary engine car, little sports car, and I modded the heck out of it. I did all the suspension work, the engine work, aerodynamic works with spoilers and all that kind of stuff. And I became known as pretty proficient on the streets of Oakland. But somebody said, listen, you have a lot of talent. I see that, you're beating everybody. But before you kill yourself or somebody else, take it to a racetrack, right?
Yeah.
I would have loved to go on racing, but I didn't have the financial wherewithal. And that's why I went to Berkeley, because my father, who was a theoretical chemist, he exposed me to computation and computers. what he did is something called quantum Monte Carlo, which is a study of the collisions between atoms and molecules. So my father's a PhD, he's a very heavyweight dude, right? But he was right there at the cusp of the high-tech boom. You know, back then, the power of our smartphone that we hold in our hand took up basically the whole basement of an IBM building, right? I mean, you know, you started talking about huge computers with mag tapes and disk drives and all that kind of stuff, but not nearly as powerful as what we have in our hands. So anyway, technology evolves. But what it did is it kind of said to myself, listen, if I go and get this piece of paper from Berkeley with engineering degree, I could probably write my ticket as far as being in a financial position to buy a race car. And that was why I did it. I didn't want to go, you know, become a doctor or a lawyer or, you know, anybody in business and marketing, because it takes too long. That career takes too long. I figured if I got my behind kicked for 4 years straight at Cal, I could come right out there and buy a race car. And that's almost effectively just what I did.
Wow. Now, when I think of race car or racing period, you know, and I'm not, you know, a lover of the sport, probably when I think about race car driving is when I get on 285 in Atlanta. I'm trying to stay in that outside lane where they're gonna run over me. But when I think about race car driving, I think of Talladega, I think of Daytona, I think of Indy 500. Mm-hmm. I can't picture any big races out west. Are there, you know, because I don't, was it, you know, was those things really happening out west at the time? Like these big races?
Yeah, absolutely. NASCAR was not big on the West Coast whatsoever, you know, one iota. When I was younger, I had no desire or ambition to race in NASCAR. So the simple fact that I did make my name primarily in NASCAR is really just mind-blowing to me, because when I was a little kid and I saw NASCAR on ABC's Wide World of Sports, which was the only channel that, you know, covered the Talladega 500 or the Daytona 500 or the Southern 500 at Darlington, you know, I saw a bunch of cars running around in a circle trying to stay off a concrete wall. And I was like, that's not racing. I mean, you know, racing is like driving on the street. You turn right, you turn left, you accelerate, you brake. You don't just drop it in fourth gear and try to stay off a concrete wall, right?
Right.
And then when I saw the people that were the drivers of these, you know, NASCAR stock cars and the fans in the stands with the Confederate flags and all that kind of stuff, man, I couldn't have seen a bigger turnoff for me, right? And I was like, that's an oaky, you know, redneck sport. Yeah. I had no interest in it. I you know, for me, what was cool were sports cars and open wheel Indy cars. Like you mentioned, the Indianapolis 500, the single biggest sporting motorsports event, and I think maybe sporting event in the world. But I saw my career in racing going to open wheel like the Indy 500 or sports cars like, you know, the biggest sports car race here in this country is the 24 Hours of Daytona, a once around the clock endurance race that takes place in Daytona, Florida. So I saw myself racing in one of those two disciplines, never in a million years racing in NASCAR, but lo and behold, that's where I wound up. That's where the opportunities presented themselves. And I really made a name for myself in that sport. But listen, to get there, I mean, it was so difficult to try to, well, let's rewind the clock. Before even racing, just going through the curriculum at Cal Berkeley. I remember we graduated like 600 students in the College of Engineering when I graduated, and I could count the number of Black students on one hand, okay? A lot of us attempted to get a degree in the College of Engineering, but we were weeded out, you know, we didn't cut it. And we wound up getting maybe just a computer science degree from the College of, Letters and Science, from the College of Letters and Science, as opposed to the College of Engineering. So I have a legitimate dual degree from the College of Engineering. So it was hard, man. I mean, you know, the best of the best, the elite of minds from not only in our country, but around the world. I was competing against, you know, a lot of Asians as well as whites. And, you know, the thing that they had were strength in numbers. When I was there, like I told you, I looked to my left and I looked to my right, and I was virtually the only one. So I just had to keep driving, you know, using the mindset and the dedication and determination to get through it, because I knew what this piece of paper would do for me in terms of really what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be a race car driver. I didn't want to be an engineer. And later I became a research and development project manager, managing a couple dozen engineers. That wasn't what I wanted to do either. But, it's what I had to do to get to where I wanted to go. It's the sacrifices that you make.
Yeah, that's the point I want to kind of emphasize throughout the interview, is that every step you made had to be a sacrifice. So let's go back to high school. Were you 3.0, 3.5 in high school? I mean, what did you say? I'm gonna take this risk to go to Cal? Well, first of all, you had to have good grades to get accepted in Cal, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was, I think, a 3.75 or 3.8, something like that. I wasn't valedictorian by any stretch of the imagination, but I was strong. And, I had a lot of extracurricular things, a lot of sports, a lot of athletics that I played. And, I had some leadership things and organizations that I was doing in high school. So I was well-rounded. And, I think that really bode well for, my being accepted to the school.
Did you talk about your dreams and goals while you were there? Did you tell people, hey man, I'm just here to get this, I'm gonna buy me a race car and I'm gonna go out here and win? And did you tell people that, or did they you didn't want to say what your goals were? Because a lot of people try to kill your dreams. So
right, those that were my friends and my confidants, they knew where I was headed, but it was not general knowledge by any stretch of the imagination. Or I'm sure, the word might have gotten out, and who knows what might have happened as far as somebody trying to derail, my situation, because Berkeley was extremely competitive. I mean, I had friends that were coming over from Asia saying that if they didn't maintain a certain GPA, they were sent back overseas and somebody else was sent back over to Cal in their place. I mean, that's the sort of competition I was up against. I mean, we're talking about, again, the sharpest people. Very few people get accepted to the school. So, everybody is creme de la creme, and there is no okey doke or half stepping. So when I was there, it was no half stepping. It was no, there was of course opportunities for me to go and, take a deep breath and stretch my legs. But, one of the things that I was recruited for, or not really recruited for, but I was asked to do, was join the track team, because I was pretty good in track in high school. And I told the track coach I couldn't do it. I couldn't afford to derail or sidetrack myself from getting this piece of paper. I was very focused on, I need to get this degree so I could get into the industry, get that paycheck, and start racing.
Wow. So during that time, those 4 years, were you dream building? Did you go out to look at these cars? Were you looking, I can't wait, this is the car I'm gonna get? Did you go test anything, or
Yeah, well, I was all about, in my spare time, which little I had, pursuing that dream. And what I'm talking about is, oftentimes I would enter my street car that I told you was highly modified in autocrosses, which is like parking lot racing around cones. Cones set up the course, and it was against the clock. It wasn't wheel to wheel, but the fastest person who could get through the cone course in the least amount of time, right? I was doing that on occasion during the weekends, and I was always watching racing on TV, after I got my studies done. So yeah, I mean, I always had my eye on the prize, I mean, it was something that, again, I was just bit by the bug ever since 8 years old, just shy of 8 years old. I knew what I wanted to do. The biggest thing that drove me and allowed me to be successful was the passion I had for this dream. I mean, I could very easily been discouraged. A lot of people, when I was, growing up, were like, y'all don't race,
Yeah.
We don't do that sort of thing. You guys do stick and ball sports, right?
Right.
Like, when I first showed up for my first amateur driving school, where you learn, the rules of the road, the flags, all the sort of things that you learn when you start and participate in a race. When I showed up, with my car, people stopped talking and started pointing at me. I mean, this is Northern California, liberal Northern California. I wasn't in the deep South. I would have expected that in the deep South. But in Northern California, folks were tripping off the fact that I was out there. And of course, I was the only black guy out there, right? Just like for the most of my life, most of my career, professional career, I've always been the only one in the room, whether it's been at Hewlett Packard, where I went to, go to work right after I graduated, whether it be, in NASCAR, just about all of the platforms that I've thrown myself into. I've almost always been the only brother.
Right. So tell me, what was the biggest challenge that you had with that? Was it I'm talking about mentally dealing with that. Was it at Cal? Was it at Hewlett Packard? Was it when you first start driving? You know, when you get that real racist attitude or something. Where did you deal with that the most, and what did you do to get by with that?
Well, it was clearly when my wife and I'd gotten married, during my career at Hewlett Packard, and my wife believed in my dream. And, she said, after a 15-year career, mind you, at Hewlett Packard, at the age of 37, we had a sit down, and she said, look, hon, you're not getting any younger, and you're not getting any easier to live with. You're miserable doing what you're doing.
Right.
So you have to just devote all your time and attention, put your all into making your dream a reality, or say that you gave it your best shot and it wasn't meant to be. So I took a leave of absence initially from Hewlett Packard, and then gained traction in terms of the racing relationships that I've made, such that we committed to moving from Northern California all the way to Atlanta, Georgia, without having a secured ride, without having a well-defined future. I was pursuing my dream, and it paid off. But without question, the answer to your question, it was when I came to NASCAR, because they did not know who this black guy was coming from Northern California, without a Southern drawl, without having come up through their ranks of racing. I paid my dues out in Northern California, road racing sports cars at the professional level after a while, right? But they still didn't know who I was, because in the Deep South, everything is about NASCAR. If you're not driving a NASCAR, you might as well not be racing.
NASCAR, with 40 million hardcore fans, is trying to shed its redneck reputation.
NASCAR realizes to continue to fill the stands, they're going to have to reach out to everybody.
Right.
So when I showed up on the scene, there was all sorts of concern and, wonderment and, you name it. And when I showed up at the racetrack to compete, I gained the respect of my competitors. They knew I was there for a reason. That wasn't any gift. I earned it. But the fans, and the mindset of the fans being that somebody's infiltrating their domain,
Right.
it didn't go over well. I was
Wow.
booed. I heard the N-word murmured underneath people's breath. Nobody ever got in my face and called me one, and we'd have problems, right? But, I did hear it. There was definitely racism. There's no ifs, ands, or buts.
Mm-hmm.
But how I handled it is that I realized that these are deep-seated beliefs and culture that these people have grown up with. And I can't hold that against them.
Right.
This is their family life. This is how they grew up. This is what they were like at the dinner table. These are the values that they had. They were very much, Bible Belt. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. When I came from liberal California to the Deep South and I heard all these yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. I'm like, out there, it's, first name basis, right? It's all casual.
Right.
But very different vibe here. I learned a lot about the culture here, obviously. They learned a lot in the racing. Well, my teammates, I should say, the teams that I raced for and such, they learned about my culture. And it was important that we learned about each other's culture, because a race car driver is only as good as the car that the team provides him or her.
Okay.
You cannot win in a bad race car. The race car's got to be spot on, and you as a driver have to be spot on as well. I often tell people that race car drivers get a disproportionate amount of the glory when things go well, and a disproportionate amount of the blame when things go sideways. Because at the end of the day, the race car driver, I like to say, is only the loose nut behind the wheel, right? That's all we are. We just grab the wheel and we push the pedals.
Right.
But that race car has got to be right once it leaves the shop. Things can't be falling off it. It's got to be set up properly, handling wise, so that, everything I'm asking it to do, it responds to. So I have to be at one with my team. I have to be a team member. I'm the driver. I'm not the crew chief. I'm not the tire carrier. I'm not the jack man. I'm the driver, but I'm only one integral part of the whole team scenario. So it was incumbent upon me to spend as much time making them comfortable around me as I could be around them. Very different backgrounds we come up with. The guys that were nutting, bolting, and putting together my cars, the majority of them didn't even have a high school education. They did not have a diploma, let alone a 4-year degree from Cal Berkeley in
Right,
engineering
right.
and a 15-year professional career. So when I first came over, you know, they were like, stop talking in such, you know, big words.
Right.
And, you know, I mean, keep it simple. It's like KISS, keep it simple, stupid.
Right.
You know, that sort of thing. So it's a very interesting scenario because, you know, I'll give you just like one story. I was sitting around at lunchtime at the race shop, you know, with my teammates, and we were talking about stuff, and all of a sudden the guys are talking about, you know, a Cub Cadet. And I was like, I shouldn't have done this. I embarrassed myself. I basically blurted out, what's a Cub Cadet? And they all stopped and looked at me like I had two heads. And they were like, what do you mean, what's a Cub Cadet? I said, what's a Cub Cadet?
That's what I'm saying. What's a Cub Cadet?
It is a riding mower.
Oh, really?
These guys have riding mowers because they come from farms and acreage, right? In Northern California, you have the real estate of a postage stamp by comparison to the South.
Right.
California, especially Northern California and Southern LA, are like concrete jungles.
Right,
You know,
right.
you don't see trees, you don't see all this sprawling real estate and acreage. Here in the Deep South, man, there's just lots of land, right?
Right.
And especially where a lot of these guys are coming from that work on race cars. They come from farms and stuff like that. And so one guy was talking about his Cub Cadet, and you know, I embarrassed myself by saying, "What's a Cub Cadet?" And because in California, in Northern California, where I grew up, all you needed was a push mower. If you had an electric mower or a gas mower that you pushed, that was luxury, and it was almost unnecessary because the grass was, like I said, you know, a 2x4, you know, a 4x4. You know, there was no grass. So, in any event,
I mean, I've learned something. Cub Cadet. Okay,
Cub
so
Cadet.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
I was thinking they was going to say something about, you know, a new person in the military or something, like a rookie of, I mean, you know, your first year in the military.
right?
You know.
No, that's a riding mower, man. It's a riding mower, and I did not know. So anyway, like I said, that's an extreme example of the differences in culture that they had versus what I had. And so it's like I said, it was really important that they felt comfortable with me because, you know, they didn't know how to act around me. You know, They weren't sure because I spoke differently. I had no Southern drawl. You know, they would talk about, you know, we gonna put on towels and, you know, we're gonna put around a wedge in it and, you know, change the air pressure and stuff like that. I had a hard time understanding what they were saying initially.
Yeah.
And they were thinking I'm Mr. Prim and Proper, you know. They were thinking I'm wine and cheese, whereas they're beer and pretzels, you know. Their impression of California was everybody lives on the beach because at that time Baywatch was a popular show.
Surfer boy.
Yeah. It's like, you know, what's it like living on the beach? And I'm like, I don't live on the beach. So anyway, man, that's an extreme example of just how, you know, varied our backgrounds were but what it took, you know, in terms of I really wanted to have it bad if I up and moved 2,500 miles away to an area and a town and a culture I had no experience or exposure with.
Right.
And, you know, just threw myself into what it is I really wanted to do, which was race at the top level of motorsports. And the NASCAR Cup Series is the top level of motorsports in our country. And I got there. That's why I named my book Winning in Reverse. I didn't do it the traditional way, but I got there.
You know, I feel a little stupid myself asking you one of the questions, and I'm gonna re-ask this question because I was asking where you dream building, going looking at cars, and I'm assuming now that your car had to be created for you. You couldn't go to like a lot where they got race cars there and say, this is the one I'm gonna eventually get, because I've never seen a lot like that. So I'm assuming that your car had to be created for you to when you bought it. And one more question, how did you go about getting
So when you become a professional race car driver, you are contracted to the team. You are not an employee of the racing team typically, unless you are has so much experience and resume and success that you might be a very rare individual who winds up being an employee of a team. But most racing teams bring you on as a contracted driver for the team. Now, how does that happen, or why does that have to happen? The step is that in professional racing, the team owner is responsible for the infrastructure, which means that they have the shop, they have the haulers or transporters, they have the employees, and they have everything to put together the race cars for a driver that comes in typically with sponsorship. And that is the bigger as to why you don't see more African Americans as race car drivers, because we don't have equal access to capital. When we go looking for dollars from corporate America, we're up against all the other sports that a Fortune 500 company can put their, advertising and marketing budget behind. And when they see a black driver, they're like, well, why would we support a black driver when, our audience or their audience isn't out there? It doesn't make sense.
Well, wait a minute, let me make sure I got this right.
Okay.
Because I'm thinking you probably can put this in the same category or the same order as a record label when they sign an artist or something. But let me try to see if I can picture this with you.
Okay.
So when you come, first of all, you have to have sponsorship before a crew or a team chooses you?
That is correct. Let me even back it up further than that. Most drivers start out at their single digit age, 6, 8 years old or whatever. And most drivers start out in karting or go-karts, but not the concession carts that you have at, Disney World or whatever. But we're talking about very fast, 60, 70 mile an hour carts, right? These are serious racing carts. To get a championship or to vie for a championship at that single digit age, you can easily, or your family can easily spend 6 figures, over $100,000 to support your son and daughter in this endeavor to become a professional race car driver early on. It is insane. It is the most ludicrously expensive sport you can envision. Most people say, golf is expensive, or oh, this is expensive. Nothing that I can think of compares to professional motorsports, because it is cubic dollars. You got to pay for the car, you got to pay for your crew, you got to pay for your travel, and cars cost money, and you typically have more than one. So I'm even talking about carts, not cars, but carts. A kid is going to have their parents spend 6 figures a year chasing a championship. And it only gets more expensive from there, because once you graduate from karts, you go to cars, racing cars, and you climb through the ranks in cars until you get to the point where you're a professional. And no matter how many championships you might have along the way, when you get to the top level of racing, it requires sponsorship, and the team is not responsible for bringing that sponsorship. The driver is.
So how young can you race? How young can you be a professional before you start getting paid as a professional?
In NASCAR, 17, I think, is the age.
And you don't have to go to college. You don't have to do anything like in the, like the NBA. They want you to go a year. NFL, you got to go 4 years. They're not even letting you. But you're saying at 17, and you're a NASCAR driver, you can get paid professionally. That's
exactly right. It's crazy, because I'm an anomaly when I went through NASCAR, because I had a degree, right? Or I have a degree from college. And there's only one other driver during my span that had an engineering degree, and there's a guy named Ryan Newman. He had an engineering degree from Purdue. But all these drivers, they don't even bother finishing high school, or if they do, they get their diploma and that's it. They're off racing professionally. Very, very few drivers have a degree.
You know what's so crazy about that? How they discredit African Americans who want to leave school early to go play. They say, well, they need to get a degree, but NASCAR, they ain't even telling you need to get a degree. They just say, go make your money. And I really hate that, because some guys really have the potential to leave and go. They can come back into the degree. Now, some of them probably need to stay there. But when you look at NASCAR, I would say tennis the same way, right? You don't have to, you can start playing professional tennis without even going to college, right?
Yeah, I'm not convinced that Venus or Serena, have their degrees.
You're right. So that's
it worked out pretty well for them.
right. Yeah. Wow. So now, okay, so you find a sponsor. I don't know, how did you find your sponsor?
Man, I initially started out with shotgun approach of just sending every company I saw that had a marketing budget a proposal. That's what you do. You put together a sponsorship proposal. You tell that company what they're going to get in return for the money that they spend, so that they know that they're getting good ROI, return on investment. But, one of the things I talk about, I have 8 keys that I define that allowed me to pursue my dream of becoming a professional race car driver in winning in reverse. And one of the most important, most important one is passion, but almost as important is networking, the power of networking. I found, through going to races, meeting people, and, sharing with them my vision, my dream, finding people that have power and influence, trying to get, in their orbit, trying to have a conversation so that I have a champion. And then again, I have somebody in the inside that's hoping and pulling for me and giving me an entree so that I can sell myself to a company so that they bring me the backing so I can go to a race team and I can race. But that every year, it's like, I thought that the racing part was the hard part. Let me tell you, racing is the easy part of my profession. The hard part, well, it's three things. It's politics first, it's business second, and it's sport third. What I mean by that? The politics of racing is the getting in the room, okay? It's the meeting and greeting, glad handing, and all that kind of stuff. Getting around people that can hopefully help you, that you can appeal to, that can, give you an entree, lift you up. That's the politics. It's the kissing babies and, pressing flesh. That's the politics, being in the room. Then there's the business aspect. Once you have gotten in the room and you have the attention of a company, you have to sell yourself. You have to prove that you are the direction this company wants to go in with their 6 or 7 or 8 figure spend against any other type of sports marketing platform that they can choose, that they want to choose, right? Why racing? Why you? That's a big commitment for a company, right? That's the business aspect. You have to sell them on why you're the one. And then at the end of the day, if you get all that done, you actually get to do what it is that you are proficient at. You get to put your helmet on, you get to crawl into that race car, and you get to try to beat other guys to the checkered flag. That's the sports side. When I was starting out young, I thought that was the hardest part. I thought the racing part was the hard part. The racing part's the easy part. And that is when people ask me all the time, do you miss racing? I said, yeah, I miss the competition. And that's the only aspect I miss is the competition. I don't miss the politics and the business. That absolutely wore me out.
Do you think that there were African Americans who didn't make it because of the politics and business, even though they could drive?
Question.
They never got past those two.
No question. I tell people all the time, the reason there aren't more of us in the sport is 1, exposure, and 2, opportunity. You have to be exposed to it at a young age. You can't just, get up off the couch at, 30 something and try to be a race car driver. That's not going to happen because you won't have the experience or the reflexes or, the desire to push 10/10. You can't do it. You have to start at a very young age. What I did, I broke the mold. That'll probably never happen again. All right. That I became a professional race car driver at 40 years of age and I raced till I was 50 as a full-time pro. That won't happen. Now, again, you have to start at a very young age.
Wait a minute. Why you think that won't happen? Because of the whole thing you said, the whole process that you have to go through, that politics and the business part?
That's exactly right. And, again, at 40 years of age, you're not going to be as quick typically or as fast or as willing to take the risks as a teenager. Right. You're just not, Right.
You got other obligations now.
That's
family,
right.
Things of sort, yeah.
You are in a truly different state of mind. Yeah. You're concerned about getting home to your family or whatever, the obligations, just a different mindset. You're more mature, right?
Luckily, you had the wife that could push you, because probably some other wife might not have pushed you. You know what I'm saying? But you had that one.
I had the wife who is just completely 100% supportive of me and believed in my dream. Guys tell me, like, Bill, you are so lucky. I'm like, yeah, you don't have to tell me twice. I'll kick my coverage. There's no doubt about that. No question. For her to agree to, just uproot ourselves, move all the way across the country, and you don't have something there that's guaranteed waiting for us.
Right.
Come on, right?
Right.
But
that's a movie. That's the story. That's your book, I guess.
Yes, that's my book.
Yeah, I can imagine nights and
sleepless nights.
Sleepless nights, yeah, and other issues.
We gave ourselves a 3-year plan. If I didn't get this to happen, if I wasn't successful in becoming a professional in 3 years, then I had to go back to the reality of going back into high tech and engineering. And I did not want to do that. But let me circle back to the other thing. It's exposure, number one. You have to be exposed to it at a very young age and have the desire to do it, because as you know, African Americans, we are predominantly exposed to stick and ball sports and the music and entertainment industry.
Yeah.
That's what we consider cool. We don't consider racing cool.
Race car, yeah.
We don't do racing, right?
Right.
So I had no entree in terms of how to get involved in racing. So it was very difficult. But the other thing is opportunity. Once somebody identifies that racing is what they want to do, you have to have the opportunity to participate. When I just got done telling you how expensive it is, how many black families are willing to put 6 figures behind their 8 or 9-year-old kid per year? Per year.
Right.
There's a lot of white families that grow up in it and they know about it and they can afford it because they're in those positions of power and influence. They can get those checks stroked. We typically can't. And so we are discouraged, and we just, I can tell you how many, brothers and sisters I've spoken to that want to be race car drivers. And I ask them what their age is. And, if they're typically too old, it's like, I got to just be honest with you. It's going to be extremely hard. But if they're young enough, I'm talking to their parents typically. And I said, listen, the most important thing you can do is find a revenue stream. That's the most important thing, so that you can consistently put your son or daughter into the environment that they need to be in to be successful and climb the ladder. Because so many of us have fallen off the wagon because we get demoralized and discouraged because we can't do what it is we want to do because we don't have the financial wherewithal to be able to do so.
Sadly, critics say most corporations will not risk their marketing dollars on black drivers. Black ball players, you bet, they say, that's a gold mine. Black drivers, that's a money pit.
So you finally get a sponsor. Who was bold enough as a team owner to bring you on board?
I had the very good fortune, once again through networking, to meet a guy by the name of Ed Renzi. He was a former president and CEO of McDonald's. He had retired and he just loved racing, created his own racing team. And so the person who mutually introduced us to each other told Ed about me. And when I got to meet Ed, Ed said, hey, Bill, I understand that you're a race car driver. And I said, yeah, I'm a race car driver. He said, well, have you ever driven a heavy car? And I said, well, what's a heavy car? He said, a stock car. And I said, no. He goes, yeah, I heard you've driven those little sporty cars, little sports cars and stuff like that. And I said, yeah. He said, well, let me see how good you are. And so what he organized for me, what he established was a test to see if I was as good as I thought I was and I could impress him. And so what I thought was going to be a private test at a little track wound up being a full-on race weekend in a competing series of NASCAR called ARCA, still with stock cars. And so after Ed brought out his primary car with his full-time driver, off the trailer in the next car was a primer gray backup car. He said, okay, Bill, I understand that you said that you can drive. There's your car. Show me what you can do. This, mind you, Tony, the first time I've ever been behind the wheel of a stock car, the first time I've ever been on an oval in my life. I don't know what a stock car is supposed to do and what's not supposed to do, but I have been fortunate enough to be blessed with a God-given gift of feel, of driver control and feel. When I mean control, I mean, how to react proactively to what a car is going to do. And that's where the feel comes into it. You know what the car is going to do before it doesn't. If you are reacting to something, you're going to be too late, you're going to crash. And you can only be taught to be so good. It's a gift that separates the good drivers from the pros. So anyway, I get behind the wheel of this stock car, and had he allowed me to race the car, which he wasn't going to, because I had no experience whatsoever in ARCA, the series probably wouldn't have let me do it anyway. Quite frankly, I was surprised they allowed me to take some test laps. But I was so good that had my practice time been my qualifying time, I would have qualified in the top 10 in a 30-plus car field. The first time I ever stepped behind the wheel of a race car. That told Ed all he needed to know about my natural God-given ability.
You have to be willing to call audibles the whole day. I mean, you can start the race if your car doesn't feel good because you don't have practice. So if the balance of the car is not right, you got to sit there and say, what do I need to do to get this thing to the end? So you got to be willing to call audibles all day. If you're in a good spot and can stay up front, stay up front. If it doesn't feel right, go to the back. You get caught in the middle, then you got to start making decisions. So it also affects the pit crews. If you come in with a group and you're in the back of that group, sometimes you got to alter your strategy a little bit. Instead of taking 4 tires, maybe you take 2.
That's right.
Instead of taking 2, maybe you don't take any. So you really have to be willing to always call an audible.
Because I could communicate to my crew chief what I needed in the car to go faster. Because what probably most people don't realize is that these cars change their dynamic over a fuel run, over a 20 or 30 lap stint. You're burning off tires and fuel, and that changes the balance of the vehicle. And what I mean by the balance, if it was initially tight or it was understeering into the corner, which means that if you go into a corner and you're going too fast, you're going to hit the front first. You're going to go in front first into the wall. Right. That's tight or understeer. And oversteer is when you turn into the corner and you wind up going around backwards and hitting with the rear because it's too loose. Okay. What you want is a car that is neutral, that when you go into a corner, it does exactly what you ask of it. When you turn into the corner, it's not too tight, it's not too loose, it cuts right through the corner, and you can stay on the power as long as you dare to, right? So I was able to communicate effectively with the crew chief that I'd never worked with before, in terms of exactly what I needed for the car to go faster. And everything I asked him to do that he did, I wound up going faster. That told Ed all he needed to know.
Name one of the most popular sports in America without a black superstar. NASCAR, the hugely popular car racing circuit. And NASCAR is determined to do something about that because it makes sense, as in dollars and cents. Here's NBC's Fred Francis.
Bill Lester is the only black man racing in America's fastest growing sport.
I've been so impressed this week with Bill Lester out of Oakland, California.
So as a result of that, I became the first African American in NASCAR history in 1999 to start in the Busch Grand National Series, which is now called the Xfinity Series in NASCAR. So I was, they called me a trailblazer.
So that was a stock car race?
Yes, that was a stock car race on a road course.
When you say stock car, give me a picture of a stock car. Is that the older car that? Or...
No, stock car doesn't have anything to do with the age of the car. It has everything to do with how the car is built. Okay, a stock car is built as a tube frame chassis, bunch of steel tubes welded together with traditionally a sheet metal body laid on top of it to resemble your street car. Like your
is that NASCAR, the stock car?
That's NASCAR. Okay. NASCAR is stock car racing.
Before that, what were you driving before that? So that's how I picture.
Sports cars.
So
all of my experiences with sports cars, not stock cars, but sports cars. And sports cars are typically cars that come off the street or off a manufacturing assembly line and are modified to be race cars. Stock cars never came off of a assembly line. They never went through, Ford at Dearborn or, Ann Arbor or whatever the case was, wherever Chevrolet's based these days, Detroit. They were purpose built from the ground up. Stock cars are purpose built from the ground up. They don't have any real stock components that you could get from a dealership on them. Everything is hand built. A sports car typically comes off of a assembly line and then it's completely stripped down and then built up to be a race car. That is the biggest distinction between the two types of racing. The other big distinction is that traditionally stock cars run on ovals. They run around in a circle, whereas sports cars turn right and left. We accelerate, we brake, we upshift, we downshift. Our circuits are typically 2.5 to 4 miles in length with 14, 17 turns. In a stock car, you're on an oval with basically 2 turns. They call it turns 1 through 4, but it's really 2 turns. They call the entry point of the turn 1, the exit of the turn 2. When they go down the back straight into the next corner, that's the entry point is turn 3, and then coming off that corner is turn 4. But it's really just, like this, like an oval, like a circle, but typically an oval, right? Where sports cars, we do all this. We go up and down, blind crests, they're usually cut in the hills. You know,
Okay.
yeah, it's a whole different racing discipline. I can spend forever telling you about it, but for the interest of time and probably your viewers' interest, we'll probably keep it simple.
Yeah, I got it now. So now the two guys that you kind of looked up to was Willie Ribbs and who was the guy before him? Wendell?
No. My first racing idol was a guy by the name of Ayrton Senna. He was a Formula One driver from Brazil, and he was magic behind the wheel. I mean, I just never seen anybody with so much car control and so much ability. And he was just like, you know, I would watch his in-car camera shots of what he was doing, and that's when I was telling you I was self-taught. I watched and emulated a lot of what he did. Because I couldn't afford to go to a racing school. A lot of, you know, my counterparts, they were all going through racing schools and all that stuff. I was self-trained. You know, I learned through the School of Hard Knocks. You know, I've had accidents and stuff like that, pushing, you know, my ability and the ability of the car and trying to find out where my limit is and sometimes overstepping it. But anyway, Ayrton Senna was initially my hero. And then, you know, Willie T, because Willie T was doing everything I wanted to do. He was a full-time professional racer while I was an aspiring racer. And he was living in San Jose, California at the time when I was working in the Silicon Valley, living in Oakland and working in Cupertino. And almost every lunch period when I was on the job, I would go over to Willie T's house because I was going to have a chance to learn at the feet of the master. He is a guy who was where I wanted to be, and he was effectively my mentor. He basically took me under his wing, and he basically showed me all the things to do, but he also inadvertently showed me all the things not to do, because Willie T is cut from a completely different cloth than I am. I'm, you know, he is a guy who grew up on the farm and, you know, drove tractors and stuff like that. I was very much white collar, you know, so I learned a whole lot of stuff about, you know, his rough and tumble life and how he lived it versus the much more conservative life that I led. But the important thing was, as a racer, he was somebody who I could go to and I could look at and I could study and emulate and see what he did and how he conducted himself in front of the press and how he chased sponsorship, because Willie had to do the same thing I was doing.
Right.
He had to chase sponsorship too. The good thing about his situation is that he got to hook up with Bill Cosby, and Bill Cosby paved the way significantly for him.
Wow.
But he was still on the phone every day trying to get sponsorship. And it's crazy because people don't think that that's an aspect of it. But if you step back for a second and realize that at the top level of NASCAR, which is the Cup Series, it is a $20 to $25 million commitment per year. That's how much the sponsorship is that you have to raise to race full time at the Cup Series level. $25 million.
Now, are these these agreements are annually or 2 years, 3 years? Or you have to get them every year, or what? How does that work?
As I said, per year, annually, every
Wow.
year. And people say, how can you spend that much money? But if you realize that a number of the big teams like Hendrick Motorsports or Joe Gibbs Racing that have 4 cars under their stable, they're employing about upwards of 500 people to support those 4 cars. Well, how are they employing so many people? Well, it's become all technologically driven. It's all computers and telemetry and simulation. And I mean, it's unbelievable how you can burn through all those resources. Plus, it's actually burning up tires and fuel and transportation once you're on the road. But the races are won and lost these days back at the shop. All the racing is a verification of all the simulations and the models that you put on that car so that it has the right platform. It does everything that that driver and his characteristics need it to do, because you can only do minimal things when you're at the track, because they are trying to minimize the amount of tires and fuel that are being burned from an ecological standpoint, you know, so that you're not just burning up resources. A lot of people, you know, they're tree huggers and all that kind of stuff that are very green, are like, you know, why are we spending all of this, you know, fuel and, you know, tires and rubber and stuff like that running around? Well, the result of that is that we've basically got a simulation that is proven on the racetrack. So that's why there are all these people, all the business people that are necessary, all the sponsorship people that are necessary to handle the sponsors and the relationships, all the engineers that are necessary. It is a traveling circus when you're on the road, but back at the shop, there are so many people that are working to make sure that what you learn that weekend goes into the next car before you go to the next race.
Right. Man, we got about 8 more minutes, and I got about 3 hours worth of stuff I want to talk to you about. So let me try to fit this in right quick. What does Michael Jordan have? What does he have a team?
Yes, Michael Jordan is a team owner with Denny Hamlin, who is a current driver, and they own a team called 2311 Racing. 2311 because 23 is Jordan's number, 11 is Denny Hamlin's number, and they are the team that Bubba Wallace races for.
Okay. And so how long will a race car driver stay with a team?
Well, the goal is to stay with the team, the same team, for your whole career. Does it work out that way? Very infrequently. Usually performance falls off, at some point, or, chemistry doesn't mesh between the driver and, crew members or crew chief or whatever, or the sponsor gets tired of that driver and goes somewhere else. I mean, you wouldn't believe the number of sponsorship poaching stories I could share with you in terms of, these sponsorship people running around and trying to steal sponsors of other teams, and it's cutthroat. Wow. It is a sharp, invested environment.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Wow.
It's crazy.
So I heard you mention Formula One.
Mm-hmm.
Is Formula One racing is what you see like in Monte Carlo?
Yes. Formula One is the pinnacle of motorsports worldwide, and that's what I'm saying. NASCAR is number one in the States, but Formula One casts the longest shadow because it's worldwide. It is.
Did you race that? And you race in a Formula One car?
No, I've never had the opportunity to race in a Formula One car. My career, like I said, took off too late. I wasn't racing cars at a single-digit age, right? Lewis Hamilton is on the circuit as a brother racing for Mercedes because he was discovered at 8 years old by a guy by the name of Ron Dennis, who ran McLaren's Formula One team and signed him to a contract, a development contract at 8 years old. Otherwise, Lewis probably would have never gotten to where he was because I'm pretty sure his father, Anthony, would have run out of money. But he was fortunately discovered by a full-fledged Formula One team, took him under, their wing, and he became, the driver he is today. 7-time Formula One world champion.
What race you were a part of that was sponsored by Rolex? Which one was that?
That's called the Rolex 24 Daytona. It's the once around the clock endurance race. In other words, this car starts out at like 3 p.m. on Saturday, and they drop the checker flag at 3 p.m. on Sunday. It is an endurance race in the sense that you have typically either 3 or 4 drivers in the car, not at once, but as a team, and you rotate through the drivers on, every 2 or 3 hours. The next driver will get in the car. He'll do a 3-hour stint. Then he'll bring it in, and then the next driver will get in the car. So, I might start out at 3 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon when I begin the race, and then my next stint will be maybe 3 in the morning, and I'll go till 6 a.m. watching the sunrise, and then I'll go maybe at noon and finish the race or something like that. So yeah, that's how it works.
People stay there all night?
All night. It's a party.
But do you at least get a Rollie? Did everybody get a Rolex, or you got to win to get a Rolex?
You have to win to get a Rolex. And I almost got one, but my co-driver had he just messed up, crashed the car, and that was it. We were on pole. We started out in first position. We were leading the race going away. He had a brain fart, crashed the car, and we were out.
All right, last thing. Tell us, to where you started and to where you retired, and that fight that you went through, that mental toughness, that mindset that you have to have. What can you give a person about not quitting and not giving up? Is there one particular book that you read that you liked? Is it other things that you did? What can you say to a person whose goals and dreams might be something else, not race car driving, but something else? And I believe that in order for a person to win in life big, they got to sustain and deal with the mental toughness that you have to go through.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know one thing is have a great partner, a great wife. That's one thing. But what else would you say?
Well, absolutely. To be able to go through the ups and downs, the trials and tribulations, all the no's that I've heard throughout my career in racing. I mean, all the no's, the very few yeses. the most important thing I mentioned before was passion. If I didn't have a passion for racing, if I wasn't bit by the bug and knew this is what I wanted to do with my life, I would have probably very easily given up and realized it wasn't for me, that, you know, a black man wasn't supposed to be out there racing. But I never took no for an answer. I kept trying to find another way. If I couldn't get through the front door, I went around through the back. You got to have the passion, because what the passion does is it gives you the drive, the motivation, the ability to keep getting up the next morning when you were knocked down the night before, when you thought things were going to go your way and the air was let right out of the sails and you're starting over from square one. I have so many stories where that has happened, but I've gotten back up because I knew what I wanted to do with my life. I knew what I was given a gift to do and what I had to see through. It was on me. It was my responsibility. I had to do it. Despite all the things that tried to, you know, keep me down or knock me down, I kept, you know, dusting myself off and kept coming back. And my book, Winning in Reverse, is not a racing story. I want to make this very clear to your listeners. It is a motivational memoir with a racing backdrop. That is what it is. The keys that I identify are applicable to anybody, no matter what it is that you're trying to achieve. They apply. Take these tips and these tactics and these skills, apply it to whatever it is, no matter what, you know, you're trying to do, or no matter how old you are, whatever your walk of life is. This stuff is applicable. This stuff works. I mean, for me to do this at 40 years old, to be a professional, starting out at 40, when most professional race car drivers are retiring at 40, I have a lot to say. You know, the book is...
Your book is on your website, right?
That's right. It's at BillLester.com or Amazon.com, 5-star rated.
Okay, great. Did you ever meet Dale Earnhardt?
I met Dale Earnhardt Jr. and was good, and am good friends with Dale Jr. But Dale Sr. passed at Daytona in 2001, right before I started my stock car, my NASCAR career. My first full year in NASCAR started in 2002. So I watched Dale Earnhardt, but I never got a chance to meet him. However, I was in the stand.
You got him, Mikey. You got him, man. You got him. Come on, man. Come on, baby. Come on. Get him in the fold. Get him in the 3 car. Oh!
Big trouble. Big right behind them.
Beat him back. Come on.
To the flag.
Come on, Mikey. You got it, man. You got it.
Wow. You know, when I was researching a little about you, going through, I saw the 15-minute story on him, and I saw the accident, and it didn't seem like it looked like he would jump out the window. You know what I'm saying? Like the other guy did. The car didn't flip and all that kind of stuff. What did they say happened? He had a heart attack or something?
No, not at all. What happened is that he was so familiar and comfortable with the fact that the race was about to end. They're coming almost down to the last lap, that he started to loosen his belts, his seat belts, because he thought, you know, basically this is it. You know, my son's going to win and I'm going to finish well. So
I hope Dale's okay. I guess he's all right, isn't he?
You okay? You okay?
Saw the crash and saw the cars sitting over there and saw the ambulances and everything, and it looked really dramatized and really dramatic looking, you know, and it just looked odd.
And for whatever freak reason, he crashed into the wall, and he suffered what's called a basilar skull fracture, where his neck snapped forward.
This is undoubtedly one of the toughest announcements that I've ever personally had to make. But after the accident and turn 4 at the end of the Daytona 500, we've lost Dale Earnhardt.
And he broke his neck. It was as a result of his accident that NASCAR created the Hans device. They basically funded and researched and brought forth what's called the Hans device. It stands for Head and Neck System. And what the Hans device does, it's a collar that you wear that affixes to your helmet and is secured by your shoulder strap. So it is fixed by your straps as they're locked down, and it makes it so that your head can only move so far forward, a short distance. You can't go all the way down like he did, so you can't break your neck. And I'm here to tell you, Tony, if it wasn't for the Hans device, I wouldn't be here today, because I suffered a crash in 2004 at Texas Motor Speedway, where I went into the wall at 160 miles an hour.
Carl Edwards will probably thank him later for that. Carl Edwards. Oh, big hit. That was Bill Lester, I believe, in the 22. Bill Lester hits hard. Travis Kvapil goes down pit road. David Rudiman and Chad Chaffin also involved. Bill Lester's truck comes to a stop just in front of the grandstands.
But I was wearing the Hans device, and they also created what are called the softer walls or safer barrier, where there's an impact zone where you're not just crashing into concrete walls, you're crashing into an absorption structure.
Moments ago, Bill Lester was able to climb out of the 22 Toyota on his own power and walk to the ambulance. And so very good news that Bill Lester okay with that very hard hit.
Because of those two things, I was able to exit my vehicle and get in the ambulance and, head to the hospital only because I suffered a concussion. I didn't realize that I had crashed. If it wasn't for the fact that I looked at the videotape after my incident, I would have never believed that when I came to rest on the track, that I dropped the window net, I took off my helmet, I put on my cap, I got out of the vehicle, I waved to the fans, and I walked into the ambulance.
J.R. Patton was able to get out of his truck and went to the ambulance under his own power, as did Bill Lester in the number 22 Toyota. And this is a testament to the safety equipment now on these vehicles.
Yeah, Chad, as Rick mentioned, the safety paraphernalia, the head and neck restraints these drivers have. There's another view of it. Watch, he pulls up on the inside, gets loose on the bottom of the racetrack. We've seen it happen so many times. He takes the front end of David Rudiman's truck. They both make hard contact with the safer walls. That's what's critical is that all these racetracks now are installing safer barriers. That's where they hit. That would help. All the head and neck restraint systems help. The headrests in the trucks help. I'll tell you, I would have hated to see what would have happened 5 years ago with impacts like these drivers take.
I don't remember any of that.
Well, Bill, man, look, you blessed. I appreciate this time, man. I really appreciate the time that you've given me. I didn't know I was going to be doing a podcast when we first met at the speaking class, but with Steve Siebel. But I really appreciate you doing that. Really, thank you for spending time with us. And when we come out, I'll make sure I send you everything so you can take a look. You know what? Last question. This I ask everybody: the greatest, Michael Jordan or LeBron?
Michael.
Okay.
The reason why, is because I never ever saw Michael quit on his team or himself. I've seen LeBron quit. I've seen it where his team was down and he just knew it was over and that was it. Michael never quit.
Wow. All right. Thank you, man. We out of here. We'll talk later. Tell your wife thank you for letting us borrow you for an hour.
Sounds good, Tony. I appreciate it, man. Take it easy.
Make sure that you like and subscribe and hit the all button and all that kind of stuff, because we're going to have a lot of good interviews on this podcast.
You got challenges that you're going to run across.